Welcome to today's episode of the Capstone Conversation. I am your host, Jared Asch, and today I am joined by BART Board of Directors member Deborah Allen, who represents Contra Costa County on the board. This is recorded a week after the qualifying deadline for the November ballot, and she has stepped aside. We're going to hear about her plans for the future and the legacy that she is leaving behind. Welcome, Deborah. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell us a little bit more about yourself and the district that you represent.
About me, I spent a whole career starting out of college in the accounting industry, CPA, and the last full-time job was, and still I am a part-time CFO, but was always in the construction industry, mostly commercial, for most of my career on the finance side. In 2011, in the aftermath of the housing crash, which then turned into the commercial construction crash, I got out of the full-time role and went to consulting and found that pretty rewarding. Then someone pulled me into politics. Even as a business owner, an executive for a construction company, I was always involved in watching what was going on in local politics. That's always been my thing, not the national level, but all politics to me starts at the local level. Somebody convinced me to run for state assembly on the Republican ticket, and I did that in 2016 against Tim Grayson and May Torlakson. Didn't make it through the primary. And then in the general election, there's a local Senator Glazer who asked me if I was interested in running for the BART Board of Directors. At the time, the current director had told people she did not intend to run. So people locally were out looking for somebody to replace her, and so that's what I did. That's how I got the BART.
And you've served 8 years now on the BART board, right?
8 years. I was sworn in December 2016.
And your territory that you represented shifted with redistricting, but you primarily represent central Contra Costa County?
Yes, the current district right now is Martinez to San Ramon, the 680 corridor, with only the northern part of Lafayette and then out to Clayton, most of Concord. But the shift occurs in this next election in November. The district has dropped Martinez and the southern part of San Ramon and picked up all of La Mirandas. It was a mission of the people in the La Miranda area to bring this district back together with all three cities, and instead of what it is now, which is just north of Lafayette. And that's what we did in redistricting.
Yeah, and that makes logical sense if you're on the yellow line, right? One voice for that key section of that line and the cities participating in it.
Yes, it also makes sense for San Ramon because most of the people in, at a minimum, southern San Ramon, but maybe all of it, are really using the Dublin Pleasanton BART stations. And so their representative now becomes the person representing District 5, which includes all of that Tri-Valley.
One of the biggest issues facing BART that we all read about and hear about is the fiscal cliff.
Of course.
Talk to us about what is that? What are some steps BART has taken to solidify that from falling off a cliff to make it more of a hill and a slide, and where it could go long term? First, as you do that, explain why did it reach this fiscal cliff? It's not just because of less passengers, it's the financial model of the organization. If you can walk us through that and share any thoughts you have.
Sure, nothing is simple. And I've been known to take on more complex problems in my life, like pension boards and things like that. So now here I am at BART. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, the lockdowns occurred about mid-March. I had told everyone for 5 months that I was not going to run for re-election for the BART Board of Directors in 2020. And then the pandemic hit, and it truly was a crisis in a whole lot of ways in our lives. But it was a crisis for BART because on March 16th, the BART system was a ghost town. We dropped down to something like 6% ridership overnight. The history of BART is that at that time, we were something like 63 funded by rider fare revenue and parking, okay? And so, obviously, when you lose all of your riders, you lose all of your revenue. So it was a fiscal crisis caused by the lockdowns of the pandemic and businesses not being able to go to work. And BART, the majority of its ridership was always heavily reliant on weekday commuters to work. Fast forward, we get into June, July, August, I have to file for reelection, and people came to me in the region, said, "You're the only financial person on this board. We need you now more than ever." And so I ran for reelection. Didn't want to. I really had other things to do, but I really felt I was a person who had a lot of knowledge about BART's budgets and its finances, and that I owed this to the region. Over the last 4 years, we got through the pandemic. In about 2021, everybody was feeling better. The vaccines came out and things opened back up. We've been in recovery ever since. What I had said to Bart, and there are opinion pieces dated back to the summer of 2020 about this, is that Bart needed to bring its budget in line with its current scenarios. Now, the federal government provided $1.6 billion of funding to BART alone. Okay. There was much more that went to other transit operators in the region. But BART alone got $1.6 billion to fill the deficits. Now, those deficits have ranged from 300 million per year to somewhere closer to 320, 330 million. This is operating deficit. Operating revenue, fair income, and traditional taxpayer assistance revenue minus what it costs to run the system on a daily basis. 77% of that is labor. Those deficits are now projected to be $350 million per year and climbing as inflation grows. The thing that I've said all along is that we have to look for ways to bring operating costs down. Back in 2021, we were running 55% of the service that we ran in 2019, pre-pandemic. We had cut service. Night, weekends, we had cut down to on Sundays to running 3 lines instead of 5. We found a way to cut operating costs, yet BART continued to increase its spending over that last 4 years. It we are now we are now running more trains than ever before, more than pre-pandemic, and we are serving only about 43% of the ridership that we had pre-pandemic. And we are spending far more than we ever did before 2019. There was a small $30 million drop in the budget in 2021, and that was due to us running 55% of the trains. And then immediately 2022 went back up beyond 2020, and in 2023 the budget increased by cent. The fiscal year 24 budget increased by 9%. The fiscal year 25 budget, which we just passed in June, increased by 11%. The budgeted spending keeps going up, but the ridership has been pretty flat at around 40 to 43% over the last year. One of the things that I and another director kept saying throughout this whole time was, we've got to start to think about the new normal, right? People became accustomed during the pandemic to not commuting to work 5 days a week. Some are now commuting 3 days a week, some 4. Some are still not commuting at all, and they're doing their whole job from their desk at home like we are doing right now.
Mhm.
And yet BART keeps planning for this return of ridership to what we once had in 2019. Back in 2019, when we were at full capacity, we had packed trains and couldn't run any more trains through the Transbay Tube any faster. We were planning, even back in 2016, for a second Transbay crossing because of that, to run even more trains. We were planning for an extension to San Jose that had ridership projections back then that are not even close now. People don't project that the extension to San Jose is going to carry nearly as many riders as they projected back in 2019. And we have plenty of capacity now running the system that we have, yet we have now spent, gosh, 150 million of Measure RR money has been allocated to just the planning studies of this new Transbay crossing. So we're in a new time, and this is where, my biggest gripe with BART is they've failed to adjust to this new time that we're in. And they keep moving forward with spending more money, increasing the system, increasing the service that's being run. And if you look at who's riding the trains late at night, it's not a whole lot of people. And there are other pockets of times on weekends when there are just not a whole lot of people. There's not a demand for it. And what I've always advocated for the last 4 years, I have another colleague, Director Ames from the Fremont area, who has stood with me in this mission of we've got to start looking for how we restructure this organization to be efficient and provide the transit that we need in the Bay Area in a cost efficient manner. And we're not doing that.
I don't take it regularly, BART, but I went in yesterday into San Francisco. I think I had to be there at 11, and it was nice to not have to wait in that 2021, 2022 timeline when it would take you 35 minutes to wait for the BART train. It was nice to wait 10, 15 minutes for a train. So,
Should have
uh,
been 10.
you could plan around that. The new trains are nice. They're so much cleaner. There's more room, but you're right. We have to plan for what is the new future. And in fact, I was going yesterday to a Bay Area council meeting of their transportation commission, and we were talking about what do people want in the 2026 transportation ballot that may come on from MTC. One of the big things that came in discussion was, hey, we need money for the agencies, but if you just ask to bail out BART and all the buses, nobody in that room thought that it was going to pass. People wanted to see more services and more transportation. People actually talked about two measures, right? One, which is like the bailout, because then people can understand it. That's less impactful on a tax increase. But then look at how could you innovate? How do you fix 37? How do you add a fourth bore on the Contra Costa tunnel, which is already done? But those kind of projects that inspire people to do that. What are your thoughts about a fiscal measure for 2026? Where could it best be used and how can it better manage BART fiscally?
First of all, we do have to start to pick a future and aim for it, right? We can't just keep saying, what if it's this and what if it's that? We will just keep spending money endlessly. Some of it may come true and some of it may not. We have to come together with some agreement of what's our target? What's the target of what BART looks like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? And that has to be tied to the growth of the Bay Area. And I can tell you that the growth of the Bay Area has been, those projections have been dialed back. We have to start there if we want to do good planning. But with respect to filling deficits, we've been filling deficits for almost 4.5 years. The 1.6 billion from the federal government, that's it. There's no more coming that anyone can anticipate. And another 350 million, which is equivalent of 1 year of BART's deficit alone, was allocated from the state budget last year. That money runs out in 2026. Okay. And then it's 350 million. Actually, it's higher than 350 million in deficits now because the BART Board of Directors just extended the labor contracts after we passed the budget for fiscal year 26 and beyond. And that's going to cost another 20 million a year. So now we're heading up to 400 million a year in deficits. So the first legislation that Senators Weiner and Wahab put forward this year had been pulled to put this on the ballot for a tax measure. It started out with projections. The Bay Area region operators needed $750 million a year to be able to fill their deficits. Status quo without changing anything. Okay. They don't have to change the way they operate. They don't have to be more efficient. They don't have to look for ways to reduce overtime in the labor contracts through the inefficient work rules. They just need $750 million a year. I call it, that was plan A, and then I call that the more money, please plan. Okay. We're just going to keep doing what we do. We're not going to get any more efficient and we're not going to change anything. And we just want another 750 million a year and we'll all be fine until it's not enough, which my prediction is 5 years down the road, it won't be enough. And then they'll need more. We cannot keep conditioning these transit agencies, and primarily labor unions are behind the transit agencies. As I said, 77% of the cost is labor. We cannot keep allowing them to keep coming back for more money. So that's plan A. And what my colleague, Director Ames, and I have continuously said for 4 years, what is plan B? There still is not a plan B. The answer has to be somewhere in the middle of waiting 35 minutes for a train, what we have now, which on the yellow line, we're fortunate we have 10-minute headways. Train comes every 10 minutes, and that's great. But there has to be something in the middle of looking for how we cut certain services that are not really efficient to run, just like bus systems have to do. If it's not efficient and nobody rides a bus that is running on a particular route, if no one's riding that route or only one person is riding that route, we'd be better off just giving them Uber passes because the trains are far more expensive to run per mile per passenger than a bus or an Uber ride.
We did a podcast episode with AC Transit and County Connection, and they talked about some routes they realized maybe even before COVID they should have canceled, but definitely some up into the hills and the parks that they don't need to do as frequent.
Right. Or they can run a smaller, they don't need to run a full bus. They can just run a small shuttle.
Mm.
And we could run small shuttles that are more efficient, more energy efficient. There are options like that. Unfortunately, BART is stuck in the status quo option. We're going to keep doing what we are doing over and over. We just want you to give us more money to do it. Plan B has not been developed. I look forward to there being a plan B. It started out at 750 million per year of need. And by the time the legislation was pulled, it was something like 1.2 billion. Everybody had come out of the woodwork saying, but I need money and I need money. And this is what happens in tax measures, right? You have all kinds of special interests that come when they hear the word tax measure. And then these special interests show up with their hands out. I've sat on Contra Costa Transportation Authority meetings and watched this happen before my eyes. Transportation measure. And suddenly this person comes to the meetings and says, oh, but my special interest needs this much money out of your tax measure. This is the problem. We've got to have leaders that are focused on solving the underlying problems and not just asking you and I for more money.
Yeah, especially as it's growing. If we all ran our household budgets or our business budgets like that, we wouldn't get
That's right.
the 26 potential ballot measure for transportation funding from MTC. Any thoughts on that? What should that look like?
I hope that looks like appropriate amount of funding for an agency and that somebody does some homework and studies on what that number is and that it's not $1.2 billion per year. By the way, that at least the last version of the measure discussed was going to be an open-ended menu of taxes. Sales tax, property tax, payroll taxes. We start talking payroll taxes, we're pulling it out of the small businesses. I'm a small business owner, and I don't know that our business would stay. We're struggling right now with inflation to keep up with the cost of our goods that we then resell and the cost of our labor to install the goods. And every time a new tax comes onto us, we sit down as a family and say, is it worth it for us to continue? I don't think legislators understand that. And I don't think the public understands that either. When they call up my glass company and say, I got a broken window, I need it fixed, and they get the price and they can't believe it could cost that much to fix a window. They're not putting that together with the costs that we now have to bear in all of these taxes and regulations. We have to combine that with what we have to charge to get in a truck and go to their house and fix their window.
And a nickel charge on gas or something else really just starts impacting that.
Right. It's about the tax measure. What do I think that looks like? Most of my work at BART has been in the accountability arena. In the Office of the Inspector General, I was instrumental in an audit committee. When I arrived at BART, there was virtually no oversight of how money was being spent. The reports given to the board were pathetic. We got nothing on how $1 billion a year in infrastructure money was being spent. No details. Just PowerPoint slides with pretty pictures of construction people in hard hats and a few round numbers, 100 million here and 150 million there, and no details of the actual construction contracts and the way that BART procures these construction contracts is through these umbrella contracts in $40 million increments to engineering firms, to large civil engineering firms, okay? The board every few years awards these $40 million contracts to these firms, and then BART's management has the authority to tap those contracts for whatever they need oversight, construction management, engineering for. And we don't ever get a report. I have conditioned the approval of these contracts twice now on getting that reporting, and we still do not get that reporting of how those 40 million times 8, there are 8 of these firms, how that contract money is being spent. So the oversight is still very minimal, even though I have an Office of Inspector General now. It has a very small budget, and we can thank Senator Glazer for the actual creation of that office. But it's still very minimal. It doesn't have subpoena power. The few big findings that have come out of that office, the inspector general reports it, and then it is up to the BART management to do something about it. And they rarely go after I've never seen them go after a contractor yet for recovery. And we have one very key case that is still up in the air where the IG's office, through third-party investigators, found that there was overbilling going on by a construction contractor. Actually, multiple construction contractors working together for overbilling. And still to this day, no recovery has been implemented by this BART management.
And can't the inspector general just turn that over to the district attorney?
Find a district attorney that will take it on, and I'd be happy to talk to them. BART operates in Alameda County, right?
Okay. That answered my questions on inspector general and where that should go in the future.
Let me back up.
On inspector general, yeah.
The inspector general's office, I hope, as a part of any new tax measure, that there is an independent office established that is not underneath the BART umbrella. The struggle that the IG's office has right now is she is not allowed to have any independent legal counsel. She is dependent on BART's in-house legal counsel, and they control. So where there is any kind of finding of wrongdoing that involves anyone inside of BART, it is BART hiring the legal counsel. And I've seen this multiple times. The legal advice coming out of that counsel to the IG's office is very much lacking. What needs to happen there, the solution for BART and the other transit agencies, is there should be an independent Office of Inspector General that oversees all of the transit agencies. They're all asking for our taxpayer dollars. They all should have an independent office watching how that money's spent.
That makes sense and something people should advocate for to be part of the 2026 tax measure, right?
And I will be.
Let's talk about crime. BART has this bad reputation of a lot of crime and uncomfortable situations, not just people's phones getting stolen out of their hand or their pocketbook, but bigger crimes where somebody is inappropriately touching women or pulling down their pants. What are your thoughts on the crime? What is the reputation of BART? What is justified? And how do we fix some of this?
I'm going to start high level. You're never going to stop all of the crime in a transit agency. but you can certainly make it a lot better than it is at BART. That is something I started out of the gate in January 2017, asking about fare gate replacement and station hardening. Okay. Um, I knew from conversations with writers when I was running for the seat, conversations with police officers whose job it is day in and day out to work closely with the crime that's occurring. It didn't take very many conversations to figure out that part of the problem with the system's safety from a crime standpoint had to do with unlimited access by criminals to go in and out of the system freely because the fare gates were so old. Even in 2017, they were, approaching 45 years old. The ADA gates were designed so poorly to try to accommodate ADA people. And on the flip side of that, we were allowing criminals to freely pass in and out. Same thing with emergency swing gates. This has been a talking point of mine since 2017. I started on Fairgate replacement conversations probably by late 2017, and I've pushed this all the way through. My board initially was opposed to it. When I first brought up the fare evasion control in 2017, I had board members calling me racist because how dare I want to just stop those poor people from getting where they're going. Okay, that's a quote. This is what I walked into in 2017, and it was a long journey, including going through the pandemic and watching crime rise and the homeless explosion. There were directors on my board who continuously defended homeless people wandering through our system. I have consistently said this is the BART train system, any train system, subway system. It is the most dangerous place for us to allow people in crisis to just hang out, wander, or whatever. It's dangerous for them if they're in crisis, it's particularly some that are in drug crisis or mental crisis of other means. It's particularly dangerous for themselves. They fall on tracks, commit suicide. They are living in the tunnel. There are stories of some of them living in the train tunnels. I received a phone call from a mother of a 19-year-old. This was a few years back, and she was frantic. She didn't know what to do. Her son had been killed in one of the tunnels by a train. You don't read these stories on the news. Her son had been killed in that train tunnel. And they gave her the opportunity at night to go in when the trains weren't running and at least see where he was. It appeared that he was actually living in that tunnel. There was food and debris in that spot where he was killed. And she couldn't understand why we were allowing people like this to live in the system. And yet I have board directors who are consistently opposing me and calling me a person who hates poor people and hates homeless people. They don't understand I grew up poor myself. But the accusations that flew my way back then were just remarkable. And I think over a period of time through social media, the public started to understand that I was being attacked unfairly, particularly people who ride the systems. I was standing up and speaking on behalf of those daily riders, many of whom are poor and have to take a train to get to work. The whole thing's turned in the last 2 years to where now we have a whole board that's on board with replacing the fare gates and protecting the system. One of the things that changed was in 2019. I had been working for over a year to try to get the BART police chief to do one simple change in the police officer's reporting. Add a box in the reports where the police officer was required to ask anyone who was detained or arrested whether they had paid a fare. I finally got that done in early 2019. And by the end of 2019, the data showed over 80% of people arrested in the system had not paid a fare. And I think that was a turning point once that data started getting out. BART was asked repeatedly by reporters, can we see the data? They still, to my knowledge, have never given up the data. But they won't refute that it is over 80%. That was what riders and police officers told me when I was running for the seat, that the people that they were arresting were fare evaders, and that the free flow of people in and out of the system was not the sole cause of all crime, but it greatly contributed to the increased crime. We're doing something about that. The first of the fare gates are being actually, we have now West Oakland and one array at Civic Center have been replaced with new full body length saloon style door fare gates. And that will be rolling across the system over the next year.
That's good news and an interesting stat. I got to imagine a reporter would have submitted a public records request by now for that information that hasn't been released, but thank you for advocating that. And I know there are programs for low income people that they could get free BART cards. So we're not talking about not helping people who legit want to take it to a job interview or to childcare, to medical care.
Right.
There are programs for that out there. I wanted to clarify that.
There's a new program, 50% discount to people who qualify with respect to income levels. It's an MTC run program, 50% discount on the fares.
And what about the BART police and reforms and things that you think need to continue to improve among BART police to improve enforcement and community relations? There's a big cry for more mental health training and other things.
Yeah, so definitely more mental health programs. Mental health training for police officers has actually occurred for a very long time, and it's a talking point that is great. And I believe we can't train them enough, our police officers. But the reality is, our police officers for decades have been dealing with people in crisis. It's gotten much worse, and the numbers have gotten much worse in the recent decade, and particularly the last 5 years. But simultaneously, we have fewer police officers. This is another thing I advocated for. Back in 2018, we had a program to add 19 new police officers every year to the BART system. We had a university study presented to this board that said BART was inadequate in its policing because it simply didn't have enough coverage. And our board in 2018 voted to 19 new officers every 5 years, add that to the existing, at that time was 177 or something. We added 19 the first year, and then COVID hit. My board, in its defund the police movement, dialed that back. Even the first 19 got cut back, I believe by 13. And not any more police officer positions have been added since. In 2020, and for a couple of years, there was a big movement against police officers as being the problem. They were never the problem. There's a few exceptions in any industry. You have bad players. There are bad accountants and bad lawyers, and there's bad police officers too, right? We're constantly looking to weed those people out. The police officers were made to be the bad guy in 2020. That was really unfair. I think we're now back in a different place, which is good. We've swung back to we need police officers because we've seen what happens when we don't have them.
Hmm.
But there was a long-term damage done to the policing industry. A lot of them retired. Many found other jobs because they just didn't want to be in policing anymore. And the third thing is, policing has historically been a generational thing. The fathers and the mothers started saying to their kids, go do something else. So you didn't have the generational people coming through the police ranks. The result is now it's very difficult to hire police officers, particularly at BART, where there is a huge amount of oversight, a board that historically has not supported them. Now there's a new group of directors coming in, and I hope they will have a better take on the value of our police officers. It seems like they will if you read their campaign material. Hopefully, we can rebuild the BART Police Department. It's made up of a lot of really young officers with not a lot of years of experience.
Let's talk about the election. How many BART seats are up in 2024?
5 seats on the ballot, 5 districts.
But at least yours and one other do not have opposition. you have a good quality person coming in, but they won't appear on the ballot. We're talking about a good amount of turnover. And
Yes,
District 5, which is a newly appointed person, is at least a new, even if she wins, she's relatively new.
correct.
So
But
you've
there
got,
are still there well, so I said 5 seats on the ballot. You're correct
yep,
because as of last week, for my seat, only the mayor of Pleasant Hill, Matt Rinn,
yep,
filed to run, and so I am told that race will like, he won't appear on the ballot by himself like you see sometimes.
he will not appear. They will appoint him officially in November.
And the same thing happened in District 3
Yep.
with Barnali Ghosh.
Yeah. How will the board shift with some of these new faces? Any predictions? Any thoughts? You don't
Well,
have to answer it.
yeah, I have a lot of thoughts because I watched it all closely. I think that the District 5 director has had, by November, will have had 4 months in office. We meet twice per month, but in July and August, only once per month. She has 4 or 5 meetings under her belt right now. In the few key votes I have seen, she has voted with the majority of the board on things like labor contracts and the things that I have opposed. The board at the last meeting extended the labor contracts. She voted for that. So she, in my opinion, will be more of continuing the same path. She voted for the budget without much comment about the spending increases, more of the same. While she's relatively new, she does have an opponent in November. I expect she's reelected, but who knows what could happen there. And then you have the one in District 3 was hand selected by the existing BART director in District 3. She appears that she will be pretty much more of the same thinking. And then in San Francisco, you have 2 people vying for the seat and one supported by one director and another supported by a different director. So that'll be interesting to see. The fact of the matter is both of those directors, no matter who wins, they have hand selected people who will be like them.
What advice do you have for new board members?
For the new board members, I am hopeful that they will come in questioning everything. Management is really excited to have 5 new board directors that don't disagree with one another. But the way this works is BART and for context, BART is the 5th largest transit agency in America. It's one of only 2 left that actually elects board directors. The rest of them are appointed by in various ways. But I believe by virtue of just letting people step up and be on the ballot, anyone can step up and be in the ballot is part of the problem. Okay. Because we get a lot of activists for not only transit, but you get activists for other things like housing, which is one of BART's biggest mission drifts is going into the housing business. And you get activists for homeless people, which is why you get what I described to you before of directors saying leave them alone. You get activists for everything under the sun who want to enter into politics, and the Democrat Party believes this is a stepping stone for developing future elected officials. It should not be that. A BART, a transit agency that is in this kind of fiscal crisis, running $350 million a year structural deficits. Okay, that's just on the operating side, by the way. We didn't talk about the capital budget, which is another huge problem. But 350 million in deficits just to run the system, and we're out electing activists to sit at the top and direct management. What happens is management and labor, they set the agenda and then they sell it to the board. When I was first elected, it was a surprise because the incumbent ended up filing at the urging of the BART organization because I was a Republican and they didn't want a Republican on the board. And they certainly didn't want someone who was fiscally knowledgeable, financially knowledgeable on the board. True statement. The BART organization urged my predecessor to run for reelection even after she had told everyone she didn't want to run anymore. It was her and I in that election. And after I was elected and I won by 64% of the vote, two sitting directors took me to lunch separately. Both of them in the first 10 minutes said to me, "You do realize you are irrelevant here, right?" And now I'm going to say to you 8 years later, that's probably the conversation I'm going to have with the new directors that come in. They really will be irrelevant until they find their footing, which is very difficult because this BART management doesn't give board directors a whole lot of information. I've said often we are mushrooms in a closet. It isn't until we go out and do our own research and investigation and start asking questions about alternatives to what they're proposing that we are able to actually get more information. They rehearse what they're going to say to directors in advance before the board meetings.
I do want to ask two other questions. Talk about how the system is embracing new technology. Tech is changing, housing's changing. How is the system using it?
Administration side, I'm seeing continuous advancement slowly over 8 years. When I came in the door, one of the stark things, realizations for me being a construction industry professional was that they were using Excel spreadsheets to do their budgets for their projects. I was shocked at that even 8 years ago because there were plenty of softwares available. Now, since then, we have moved in a direction of putting project control software in place, and there is a new capital project reporting system that has recently, just in the last year, been almost fully implemented. It still needs a lot of work to produce the right details for the board to be able to make good decisions. The reason I fought for that is because the board wasn't involved in how $1 billion a year was being spent and how the projects were prioritized. We made some progress there on that technology side. Day to day computers, I still hear from employees like, "Oh, I can't do that because I don't have the software." I'm like, "Wait, you don't have that? Everybody in my small business has that." Right? But I think big organization, it's moving forward on the technology, but on the operations side, I think there's still some very inefficient places. For example, it wasn't until just this year or the last extension that they did on the labor contracts, where one of the gives by labor was allowing BART to use electronic scheduling software for every 6 months when frontline employees have to bid on their shifts. Until then, they had to actually go to a room and fill out pieces of paper and put them on a board and bid on their shifts. And so BART viewed that as something that labor gave to them in exchange for their raises in order to use technology to allow workers to bid on their shifts. So that's very slow there.
That reminded me of a lot of things in my life that I've seen change. And then my last question on sustainability, transit agency, energy costs, big one. Of course, more people who ride BART, the less fuel we're using, the less emissions. But just talk about how the agency itself is becoming more sustainable and more efficient.
More sustainable is different from more efficient. We've talked about efficiency, and I don't believe they're much more efficient now than they were 8 years ago because we wouldn't see increasing budgets continuously if they were. We would expect economies of scale, right? As ridership increases, certainly as ridership decreased, we didn't see a decrease in the budget. But as ridership now increases, we keep seeing large increases in the budget with the justification of ridership is going up. You didn't drop the amount of money you needed. But on the sustainability, BART has always been a clean, efficient mode of transportation, much cleaner than driving your car to work. Cars are becoming more energy efficient as we shift to electric vehicles. On sustainability, with respect to the environment and greenhouse gases, transit is very sustainable if and efficient in that respect. We use electricity to run our trains, right?
we will leave it on that for today, but I appreciate you being here with me, BART Board of Director member and soon to be retired from that office, Deborah Allen. I'm wishing the best for all of your new colleagues as they get in there. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Jared. I appreciate it.
Wait, don't leave yet. Hit subscribe. Make sure you get the weekly updates. We have a new episode every Wednesday for stuff happening in the East Bay. In the meantime, follow me on LinkedIn, Jared Asch, or check out our firm where we have a weekly newsletter and blog at Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today on the Capstone Conversation.